Hi, so today in Parliament, a 5 day debate has begun. I suppose a series of debates would be the best way to put it, which will culminate in a vote to decide whether the MPs in the House of Commons accept or reject the deal that Theresa May is putting forward for Brexit. And, we've already discussed and speculated what might happen depending on which way it goes. But there was another vote today in Parliament. There were a few votes. One of them was to publish the legal advice given to ministers regarding Brexit. Now, there's been a number of pieces of advice that the Prime Minister and ministers have received regarding aspects of Brexit, whether it be economic advice or legal advice. And it is generally accepted that the advice that's given to ministers tends to remain secret and it's not shared with wider Commons or certainly not with the public, which, is very, very dodgy, really, because it allows ministers to ignore a strong case. However, what's happened on this particular case is MPs have asked that the full legal advice, not so much the economic advice, but the full legal advice that was given to the Prime Minister and given to ministers, be published in full. Now, that legal advice has been given as a summary by the Attorney General, and he answered questions to MPs for about 3 hours. But enough MPs were not happy that it wasn't published in full. So a vote was taken in Parliament. This is quite incredible. I can't really remember anything like this ever happening before. What a number of MPs, of course, largely made up of opposition MPs, have said is, we as Parliament have already voted to say we want to see that in full. The Prime Minister's position is, well, it's standard practice not to release it to MPs, which is true, even though I'm against that. But MPs had already voted to say, no, we want to see it. We want to see all of it. So a vote was put to the House. Now, the thing with this is, I'm not entirely sure who most wants it published. By the Prime Minister sort of keeping it under wraps or attempting to keep it under wraps, who would gain the most from having it released and made more public? Would it be Remainers? Would it be Brexiteers? I actually don't know. And it's quite possible that they don't know either, and equally possible that both sides feel that it would strengthen their argument were it published. So a vote was put today, and the consequence effectively is, if the proposal won enough support, in other words, if more than 50% of MPs voted in favour of this proposal, what it was actually doing was finding the government, the Prime Minister and her ministers, in contempt of the House. This wasn't just a vote saying, we want it released in full. That vote had already taken place and the Prime Minister has effectively ignored it. This is ministers saying, you're in contempt of the House. So the vote has taken place. I just want to play you the first little bit of it. Very noisy, the House of Commons.
Order.
The ayes to the right, 311. The noes to the left, 293.
I'll just stop it there. You can hear all the oohs. What that basically means is the ayes have won it. That means the proposal is supported. That means a majority of the House have found effectively the government in contempt of Parliament. The consequence of this can be really unlikely. The consequence of it can include suspension from the House for the Prime Minister or other ministers that the House now deems responsible. I suspect that's not going to happen. I strongly suspect that realistically what's going to happen is they're going to be forced to publish that advice. I imagine they'll want to drag their feet as long as possible. However, the Leader of the House did actually say, when pressed, when's the government going to respond to this? They said tomorrow. So tomorrow the government has to respond. There's really no way out on this now. That legal advice has to be published in full. You would think it has to be done fairly quickly. And I suppose because Parliament has the right to take, gone blurry, to take quite severe action with, in terms of consequences. It can be anything from a little telling off and saying, don't defy the will of the House again, to you're suspended from the House for a little bit because you're not playing by the rules. It's quite interesting. It just shows just how important this is, because there have been times in the past when MPs have not been happy that, you know, advice hasn't been published in full. I mean, the Iraq War, for example. And I suppose it's events like that where it's transpired that MPs have basically voted for things where they didn't fully understand all the implications. That's now making them less likely to let it go this time. And in fact, because it is so important to the country, and MPs appreciate this, they've actually, you know, so they've voted to say, no, we want that information. It wasn't necessarily a landslide exactly. So I don't know what this necessarily means about how the votes will go in a few days' time in terms of whether they accept the deal or not. Because remember, this was a different thing altogether. This was simply saying, we want to make this decision with as many facts as possible. Or maybe it's that because we know the majority of MPs would gladly vote down anything that gets us out of the EU. If the MPs were given a completely free vote, do we stay in the EU or do we not? They would all, well, you know, a vast majority, should we say, would vote to stay in. Of course not all. A vast majority would stay in. Obviously, they can't just do that because of the referendum vote. You would think there'd have to be another referendum. Even though, of course, the referendum was advisory, not binding. But everyone has taken it to be binding, which is fair enough. But so maybe what it is a case of them saying, right, however we vote in a few days' time, we want the public to understand why we're voting in that way. And by having that legal advice published, and if the legal advice is such that it compels vote in a particular way, because it lays bare certain consequences, then, you know, the MPs are much more easily able to explain to their constituents why they voted in that way. You know, this is a super serious matter. This, I can hardly hesitate to say, it's certainly unprecedented in my time. I have never heard of anything like this happening. I have never heard of a situation in my, well, certainly not in my lifetime, where the House has effectively found the Prime Minister in contempt. I mean, that's one step away from pretty much a vote of no confidence. And I know that Labour, the main opposition party, they've already said that if the deal is voted down, they are going to call a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister. And quite what that'll do, who knows? Who knows? I still don't know exactly what Theresa May is hoping for, because this is like the most spectacular game of chicken in history, surely. Certainly for Britain. You know, almost nobody in the House is going to get what they want, regardless of how votes go now. Almost nobody is going to get what they want. But almost nobody can see an effective compromise. You know, it's almost like someone who wants to shoot you in the head, but says, well, I'll tell you what, compromise. You don't want to die, but I want to shoot you. We'll do a compromise. I'll shoot you in the kneecap instead. And it's a bit like, well, I don't want that either. It's like not really seen as a compromise from the person who's been shot. So tomorrow, the course of events now is tomorrow the government has to respond. That response is not going to impress MPs unless it is to say, okay, here is the stuff. There's no reason why it shouldn't be published within the next 24 hours. I imagine they will try and drag their feet as much as they can. But this is Parliament saying we're not having it. We're not having it. Because remember, the Prime Minister doesn't have executive power in the same way as, say, the President of the United States. You know, the Prime Minister is only Prime Minister. The members of the government are only members of the government because a majority of the House say that they're fine with it. At any time, a majority of the House can remove any member of the government from that position of government. At any time. So she's had a huge warning here. So we'll have to see how she responds tomorrow. But anyway, there we go. We'll follow this up in a couple of days, I guess. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content. Until next time, I'll see you later.